Good afternoon. I like that. See, a little more wake. Good afternoon. Is it a beautiful day? Are you shining from the inside out? How about this morning, y'all? Right? Let's just take a second and really come together here in this moment. So if you just take a second and feel your feet on the floor, put both feet on the floor if that works for you. And get in a comfortable but upright position. And as you feel your feet on the floor, feel the energy that is that going through the floor into the center of the earth. And take a deep breath in. And release. And take another deep breath in. And release. One more time. Inhale. And exhale. You've just sent a message to your own personal body that you're in a safe space and that you are safe. To be in the work of abolition, which we are in, you've shown up, so you're saying yes. Means that we have to remind our physical bodies that we are safe in them. That allows us to be alert around us. I'm Caroline Durham. I'm the Executive Director for the St. Charles Center for Faith Plus Action. And you've taken a lot in the short period that we've been together. And I heard and listened in this room this morning, not just to the beautiful and powerful sharings of the team that was up here, but I listened to us and our responses. They didn't ask for a call and a response, but there were gasps and there were amens and there were snaps. And so often we have those moments and we don't step into action. Faith plus action is dead. And so the St. Charles Center for Faith Plus Action creates space for you and your congregations to look at and think about how you're going to act. If we take this information home with us and put it on our bedside table, we have failed. And so today I'm very excited to be with three other individuals who we're going to work together to talk to you about reimagined retreats and reimagining. Thoughts create. Someone thought up the prison system. In fact, many people, you do the research, thought up different reasons to have them. The Quakers said, we're going to create them so people can meditate, and it's going to make things better, y'all. That was a spiritual basis for a prison that was described this morning where people are dying. And so a piece of reimagining is what is that horizon that you want, that you see? What is a healed community where we have prisons no more and jails no more because we've created upstream solutions? And so with that, I'm going to step back and ask the team that I'm with just to introduce themselves.
We'll save the best for last up here. And I know she said that she's with three people and you thought, she can't count. There's one person joining us on Zoom who at the last minute couldn't be here. So we'll introduce Robin as well, or let her introduce herself. I'm Elizabeth Lott. Some of you know me. I am the senior pastor of the St. Charles Avenue Baptist Church in New Orleans, and I am also the associate director of the St. Charles Center for Faith in Action. So I get to work with Caroline in that capacity. The center came out of the church and now has taken on a life force of its own. And it's wonderful to witness.
Hello. Hello. Thank you. My name is Wendy Cooper. I am a woman of transgender experience. My pronouns are she and her. I am a native of New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm also the executive director and founder of my own organization, Transcending Women. And so Transcendent Women is an organization that support and empower all women to become agents of change in their community. And the purpose of me focusing on all women is I feel like our issues have some type of intersectionality. And so with that being said, Pastor Robin.
Robin?
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm really sorry I couldn't be there. I have a family emergency I'm dealing with, but I definitely wanted to make sure that I was here to represent Women on the Rise. And thank you all for being in Atlanta, my hometown. But Women on the Rise is an organization that supports women who are coming home from the prison and jail systems here in Georgia. Sorry, I didn't say, I'm Robin Haas, I'm the executive director with the organization. And what we do is we assist women to reentry, to come home and get acclimated into freedom, back and reentering the society. And we also change laws and policies that affect us, helping women to not go in, or people, period, not going in on in the first place, and changing laws and barriers that restrict us to getting our lives together when we come home. I myself did 10 years inside the Georgia prison systems here, so I understand firsthand the barriers that are a roadblock for us to become successful, and it seems like it's created for us to fail, and that's why recidivism is so high.
Thank you so much. We're glad you're here. Slide 2, please.
So without going into a lot of history, because we don't have time for that, I'm glad to talk later at the St. Charles Center booth downstairs. When the center was formed, the board of directors named 2 priorities: anti-racism and the criminal legal system. And you can't talk about anti-racism without acknowledging modern day plantations like Angola Prison in Louisiana. There are a lot of Louisiana folks here this weekend. And so we began a storytelling process that led us to the Reimagining Retreat. We believe that imagination is essential if we're going to make a new world out of this old one. And we also wanted to have a spiritual framework and a discernment model to incorporate into this retreat, so that we weren't just talking about facts and figures, we weren't just gathering information. As Caroline said, we didn't want to just get a nice notebook and then put it on the shelf when we get home. We want people to discern, how are you being called into this work? And we bring in cohorts of local churches and neighborhood organizations working together to discern, how is your community being called into this work? Part of my own calling as a pastor is acknowledging white folks, white churches, white progressives too often think that we've really discovered something, rather than we're waking up to something that's very old. And many of us will do a book club of New Jim Crow, or we'll read the Abolitionist Handbook, and then we set off like Christopher Columbus to discover a new world, instead of realizing there are a lot of people already in that world. There are a lot of people who've been working on this a whole lot longer than you have even known what you're talking about. So who's doing this work? That's the first question we ask in this retreat. Who's already doing the work? Whose stories need to be centered? Because I don't have much of a story to tell. I'm a learner in this. So you'll hear from me a couple minutes at the front, and then I'm going to get quiet. Mr. Rogers, supposedly when he died, in his wallet, he had this quote by Mary Lou Kalnacki that said, "There isn't anyone you couldn't love once you've heard their story." So we have a lot of stories, personal stories, that go into our Reimagining Retreat over the course of 2.5 days. So we ask, who's already doing the work, whose stories need to be centered, and then how do we as congregations, as faith communities, come alongside and support the work that is already being done? We really like to create a committee. We really like to own whatever it is that we think that we're making. Instead, the Reimagining Retreat is asking you to go participate in something else, to step outside of your congregation, and to make connections in your own city, in your own community, to change the carceral state right there from where you are. And then again, for predominantly white congregations, I would also ask in these retreats, how do we harness our privilege How do we harness our access to communities and doors that open easily for us in order to amplify the work that is already being done? In order to amplify what we think we're discovering, but really we're waking up to, in order to amplify the stories of system-involved individuals and families, and then also to go about the work of waking up other white folks who do not see the realities of the carceral state.
And so as you do this work, and ensure that you're doing it from an informed and respectful standpoint, there's learning to be done from the get-go about centering the voices of directly impacted people. As the center builds out programs, it's not the church putting it together, it's not me as a nonprofit leader and the team, it's building teams within the community who have been doing the work and listening. Aside from the Reimagine retreats, we've got a Heart of Reconciliation conference that came about because of a gathering I had with Amy Banks and Isaac Napper, who've written a book, Fighting Time. Isaac was wrongfully convicted of killing Amy's father when they were both 17, and they've come together. And in our discussions, they built out a team that created the curriculum and the programming for it. We do that as well here at the Reimagine retreat. But as we think about how we're going to talk about abolition, how we talk about directly impacted people, I wonder, Robin, if you're there and able to share with us some of that languaging and how we need to step into the space.
Thank you. Yeah, so one thing that I do want to have everybody understand is that language is important when you're actually speaking to people who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. We are learning that, we all know this, that there's power in words. And so when you start calling each other, when we were inside, we called each other inmates. And that was something we at the time didn't realize that word was put there, to degrade us, to dehumanize us. Words such as offender, felony, those words are all negative terms that we no longer use. So instead of calling someone who is currently incarcerated inmate, we say someone who is incarcerated or a detained person. Instead of talking to someone who's home, calling them an ex-felon, we say someone with a background, or someone, with a even with a criminal background. But it's just important to know that when you're dealing with people inside or dealing with people who are formerly incarcerated, there's very much power in the negative words that been brought on to dehumanize us, and they want to dehumanize us when we're inside. For them, the way that the treatment is they don't look at us as humans. When I worked inside a prison, I worked up in administration, which was a part of the human resources. So I used to listen to the trainings that would come on for the people who were coming on and to work inside the prison. And it was always, they're manipulators, don't look at them as humans, and so it was like a brainwash thing to have people not look at the ones who are behind the gates before they even meet any of us, that they come already with this preconceived notion of who we are and what we are. And that right there is what makes the treatment of people inside very dehumanizing. And then when you get treated like that, you start believing it. And that's why, so we used to call each other inmates. And so now when we have our organization, Women on the Rise Inside, those are the women that are our members that are actually inside, and we're teaching them how to stop basically drinking the Kool-Aid of believing those terms that people are calling you inside. And that's helped changing their thinking and changing the way that they will function inside, which would dramatically help how they are when they come home.
Great, thank you. And this list is on the back page of the program that the Alliance of Baptists team put together. One of the things we talk about, and we can go to the next slide, is what is the criminal legal system? I was a public defender for 30 years, both in state and federal court. And so the informing for me are the people that I got to work for and still have relationship with. When we talk about the criminal legal system, I frame it from birth to reentry. because there's a way in this country that there are conditions and systems that impact an individual as they are born into the world. That is not to say you are predestined. But when I was born into a family that had domestic violence and substance abuse, my mother went to treatment, the cops were never called, foster care was never called, all of those systems. And that is because I was in a white middle-class family, okay? So we also have to think about birth to reentry, because oftentimes we forget our youth, except when they're being tried as adults. And I'll say to those of you who are in Georgia and those of you who are in Louisiana, there's legislation right now where they're trying to lower the age again. Louisiana, you want to be able to try, I think it's 16-year-olds as adults. The school to prison pipeline, and a piece of what I'm going to do is just take a couple of minutes to step through this. When we do the deep dive for 3 days, we spend more time on this. There is a way that every step within this creates harm, and the foundation underneath it that we are dissolving back into the dust from which it came is the impact it has on Black and brown communities beyond white communities in ridiculous numbers, and we go into that. And when we put the layer on there of being Black and trans and woman, that number goes even higher, and you'll hear about that as well. The school to prison pipeline means that when my nephew Joseph, who is white, both of his parents are white, acts out in class, mom might get a phone call, there might be a notice. But when my partner's nephew acts out in class, who happens to be a Black male in Chicago, he's more likely to be arrested and sent to jail. And that is the first step, because once the system steps in, it continues. So when you think about the criminal legal system, it is birth to reentry. At the time that somebody is arrested, the police officer actually has some discretion in whether they're going to arrest or detain someone or give a ticket or give a warning. I get nervous when an officer gets behind me. In fact, one of the last times I was in Atlanta, I had plates that were off. I gotta stand up. That were out of date by 4 years, y'all. I've been driving a car for 4 years with expired tabs. And the young officer pulled me over and said, you know, I could tow your car, but I'm not, here's a ticket. Not gonna happen to everybody. So there's that discretion in what they're gonna do when they show up. After George Floyd's murder, the Minneapolis City Council did a study to see what 911 calls, and it was something like 80% of the calls to the police were for mental health crisis. And yet there are still arrests that happen. We can go to the next slide, please. Once you're arrested, the question is, are you going to be held or not? Bail and bond, a whole issue among itself. But a piece of it is, if you can't get a hold of your employer, if your job is such that they're not going to give you a break, you're going to lose your job if you have to wait 72 hours to see a judge. Prosecutors and judges will say, we're just going to have you pay $1,000. That's not a big deal. It's a big deal. If it's $10,000 and you want to use a bail bonds person, it's at least $1,000 that you never get back, never get back. Never get back. Plus, nowadays, they want security of a house. Now, what do we know about redlining and home ownership? We talk about intersectionality, y'all. And so there is harm right there in the first stage of it. That's just being arrested and waiting to see the judge. And the only thing that happens in a first appearance is the judge wants to make sure the person wants to know why they're charged. Do they have a lawyer? And are you safe to come back? Can we put you out in society while your case goes forward? It's discretionary. And what we saw here in Atlanta, thanks to the work of Women on the Rise, they now have typically, and it may change now, Robin, and I apologize if I get my numbers wrong, but a couple of summers ago, it was less than 100 people housed in the Atlanta jail because of things like bail reform. So when you didn't have that block, it's if you can give us money, then suddenly you're safe to be in community.
Exactly.
The pretrial phase, you can wait, time frame is usually about 30 days, but here's what happens. 30 days shows up and the lawyers aren't ready. The prosecutor hasn't given all the reports. The crime lab hasn't done what they need to do. The public defender, and public defenders are solid rock star lawyers, y'all. Don't be fooled. And I say that in part because you're looking at one. I might cover one calendar, but it's not my case. And so there's continuances after continuances as the staff on the case get this figured out, while these men and women sit in jail and have no resources, no job. When they try to call home, the amount that it costs, sometimes it's $10 for 6 minutes. I'll tell you what they were doing in Minnesota. They had a phone system that was set up that if you were calling a Minnesota number, the fees were higher, it's always a collect call, than it was for out-of-state calls. Privatization. And these are little nuggets so that you begin to crack open to understand. The prison is the worst component of it, but they're beating folks up and getting that crank going to crush the bodies long before prison comes into play. The system with regard to once you get past pre-trial, if you go to trial, and here's something I want you to know about going to trial. In the federal system, all right, I'm gonna take one more step back because my brain is doing a few things, and tell me if I'm going too long. In the federal system, if you take a plea, the guideline range of your potential prison sentence is lower. So you're penalized if you go to trial. Penalized. There are charges that a prosecutor will add on if you go to trial that tie the judge's hands with mandatory minimums of 20 and 30 years. And it is only at the discretion of the prosecutor. So when you hear that there are pleas going on, when you hear that there's high numbers, it's not because we have a lot of people who are guilty. It's because the system is set up that there's no listening. We're going to talk about restorative justice tomorrow, which is about listening. And so at each one of these phases, the pretrial hearing is to make sure you have the discovery to see if there are any concerns with how the officer did their job. Why did they pull that person over? Philandro Castillo, who lived around the corner from me at the time, I lived around the corner from him, had something hanging from his mirror. Y'all take a look at squad cars and what they have on the front, on their dashboard, that somehow that makes it so that we can't do right, but they can. And I'm going to ask you to take a moment tonight and think about when you hear that somebody has had their case thrown out and dismissed because the police didn't follow a search warrant, because the stop was bad, because the way they questioned somebody was illegal under the law, so the cops broke the law. If the language you have ever used is that person got off, I'm going to ask you to sit and meditate on that for a while. Because when that piece is there, it's telling that there's cleansing for you to do as you go into abolition work. And if that doesn't fall right on you, catch me at lunch tomorrow and I'll fill you in on it. And so pretrial is really about, did the police officers do what they're supposed to do? Now let me tell you about how the law works there. The federal system and some state systems say, if the officer thought they were doing right, it's okay. If the officer lies in a warrant application, they have to say, Judge, this is why we need to go into this house. If they lie about it, even though they swear to tell the truth, and they are the same officer that is executing the warrant, so they know it's a lie, and they fooled a judge, and they go in and they get something, and I'll give you an example, bullets in a shelf in a closet, which subjected a young indigenous man to a 20-year sentence because of prior drug dealing convictions. That was okay. You know why? Because the judge signed it. And so the cop relied on the fact that the judge signed it, so it must have been okay. That's an extreme example of a very basic thing. There's no accountability. I didn't time that right. And so when we think about the harms, and part of the reason we talk about very quickly about these different phases is because there are individuals and communities, organizations doing work at every phase. You've got organizations dealing with school discipline. You've got right here in Atlanta, you've got the Southern Center for Human Rights and Southern Poverty Law Center who are dealing with these systemic issues in a systemic way. So a person goes to trial, there are certain things they can't provide. You have a right to remain silent at trial unless you claim a defense that's affirmative, then they want you to testify. So even if you're at home with family and there's stories about this, the judge wants you to testify first. So somebody goes to trial and everybody says, and everybody says it's going to be all right because if we get messed up on trial, they're going to save us on the appellate side. How many of you think that? It's like it's okay because the appeals court is to check the trial court. Don't be afraid to raise your hand. It's all right. Once you get to the appellate side, once you have lost in court and you are convicted, first of all, you're sitting in a prison cell. And instead of a presumption of innocence, it is a presumption of guilt. Meaning that what the prosecutor has claimed, and a prosecutor can claim that the two of you were involved in something, and when you go to trial, they say you did it, and when you go to trial, they say you did it for the same incident in the same car, and that's all right. The Court of Appeal says prosecutors telling the truth, defense, you have to flip it somehow. Oh, and by the way, if the truth comes out that somebody else did this and you've got scientific evidence, because I know some folks want that, don't trust DNA, I'm going to tell you that from the get-go. A little bit of seed planting for our jurors. If you don't know that information within a certain amount of time, it doesn't matter. The courts say, too bad. There are men and women sitting in prison right now, innocent, and have been proven innocent. And because it's too late. Reentry piece is what we know. Here's the intersectionality that jumps up again. Housing issues, job issues, money issues, family reunification issues. And so a judge will say when a family is there to support somebody at sentencing and you say these children are going to have, we know the adverse childhood experiences increased likelihood, and the judge says, well, you should have thought about that. What happens when they come home and those children are working to heal back that relationship? The government's pulled them apart as a government providing resources to heal. Organizations are. I'm going to stop because I'm sure I've gone way past time. The question is, where do you step in? And that's part of the discernment that we'll talk about. Where do you take this and step in? I don't want you to be so overwhelmed that you can't act, because here's what I'm going to tell you, particularly as a white person, if it's like, I need to take a break from this, that's privilege. Because our black and brown brothers and sisters don't get to take a break any minute, any day. So steel yourselves up. We've had time. We've had time. So what are you imagining on the horizon when we don't have these phases? What is the reimagination? What is the work, and how do we get there? What do we do? Wendy, you and Robin have been bringing change every day. What does it mean to do that work, and what does it mean for people to be allies in that work with you?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Wendy Cooper. Um, just listen to Caroline, how she's speaking about the systems that, me as a Black person have to experience so much. It makes me think about my mother, right? And so my mother was a woman who was born in 1943. She's from the state of Virginia. And so at the age of 21, my mother, um, she bare 4 children. And she left the state of Virginia to come to the state of Louisiana, right? And that's when she began to have other kids. And so as a Black woman who grew up in the 1940s and in the 50s and the 60s, it was a lot of segregation going on, right? And so during that time, Black women was the most disrespectful person in the world, right? And so when I used to hear the stories of the things that my mother had to go through, I always asked why. Why she's going through these things? Why did she leave her kids? Why? I just never did understand, right? But without judgment. In 2008, my mother lost her life to cancer. She has what a lot of unfinished business, right? She lived in a world where she have never been in a house with any of her kids together at once. You have children who don't know their mother's side of the family, their father's side of the family. That's just how we grew up. And so as my siblings was growing up, I remember hearing a story of my mother didn't have that support to be able to help her get some type of childcare to be able to watch her kids. And so I remember one day my brother was telling me that someone called the police on my mother, and my mother went to jail because she had a child watching children. And during that time, Black women didn't have the resources that was needed to be able to, afford childcare and any of these things. And so my mother was incarcerated. She did 3 years in a correction facility in Louisiana. And so during them 3 years, her children were separated from each other, right? They was displaced in different homes. They was experiencing all these kinds of abuse, sexual assault, being physically abused, verbally abused, and all these different things. And so when she was released from this correction facility, she had to marry a person to be able to get her kids back, right? And so that was very hard for my mother, And the reason why I'm talking about my mother, because I feel like I have to pay homage to her because she was unable to tell her story. So I just want to tell her story too, right? And so as time went on, things like that, my mother got married. She was able to get her kids back, and then she was able to live a life, but she still had to deal with the struggle of oppression as a Black woman, being disrespected, not getting the things that she needed and things like that. And so as I got older and I began to understand, I began to experience things myself. I remember going to my mother 6 months into my transition when I wanted to tell her that I wanted to be Wendy, right? My mother was like, she wasn't in agreement, but it was without judgment, right? And so with that, my mother had her reasons why she didn't want me to go. She didn't want me to transition. She just wanted me to stay who I was, but she had me with it, but I was like, no, I want to be Wendy. And so after that, 6 months into my transition, I began to experience the issues that she was talking about that I was going to experience that conversation. Discrimination, I won't be able to access housing. I won't be able to access employment. I won't be able to access a lot of things because of this, right? And so I began to experience the legal system. And so one of the things I always stated that I wanted to help people, but I just didn't know which direction to go. So when I put my issues as a Black trans woman, and I think about my mother issues as a Black cisgender woman, I realized that our issues had some type of intersectionality, right? We was living in a world that we both was two women who was disrespected to the world. We both was two women living in a society where we was underserved. You know, we both was two women where we was living in a society where people wouldn't respect us, right? People would incarcerate us, right? People feel like that we was these individuals who was at the bottom of the barrel, right? And we both experienced incarceration. So that's how I came up with my organization, Transcending Women. And so with that, one of the things that I've learned going through this process of doing grassroots work is that focusing on people who are erased from a society, right? Who are incarcerated. People who are incarcerated are erased because the legal system teaches us, right, to think in a more antiquated mentality, right? When people are incarcerated, we assume that people are automatically guilty, right? Because that's how the system teaches us, but that's not the case. And so with my organization, what I do is I try to find ways to be able to help these individuals or who are in these marginalized situations. So what I have been doing over the years, I have been throwing money into these correction facilities to be able to help folks who are incarcerated put monetary distributions into their accounts, right? So they're able to get the things that is needed, right? Because a lot of times when people who are incarcerated, they don't have that support that is needed to be able to help them in a time when they are in their most marginalized and vulnerable moments. Excuse me, I'm kind of a little emotional right now because talking about these things is very, it could be very, hard, One of the things that I focus on with Transcending Women, I provide legal representation for folks who are incarcerated. I pay for traffic tickets, I pay for court fines and court fees, right? And all that is a part of fighting against a system that oppresses us and they just want to keep us incarcerated, right? And so that's what I do. One of the things that that I have been doing since I've been at my organization, I started a campaign called the Cans Can't Stand campaign, right? And so the Cans Can't Stand campaign is a campaign that talks about and educate people on a law that discriminates against LGBTQ individuals. In 1805, crime against nature was a law that was used to punish folks for engaging in sexual activities that is not procreative. So if you was to engage in sexual activity that is not procreative in the state of Louisiana, you could be charged with crime against nature. And so what I have been doing is educating the public on these type of issues and making them understand that this is how the system is treating communities that is marginalized, like the LGBTQ communities.
Wendy, I want to repeat what you just said, just to make sure everybody heard that. In the state of Louisiana, you can arrest people for any sexual act that is not procreative.
Yes.
Just let that sit. And again, there is discretion about how we're going to enforce that.
Yes. So prior to 2011, you're going to see on the documentary, folks who was convicted of the crime against nature statute, it was required to register as a sex offender, right? And so what I have been doing and other leaders in the community, we have been bringing awareness to this issue so people can know about this is how, leaders in Louisiana are treating communities who are severely, marginalized and things like that. Thank you.
And through Wendy's work, you organized enough people to go to the state legislature to get that crimes against nature law moved from a misdemeanor.
Yes.
I mean, a felony to a misdemeanor.
Yes. So in 2012, I was a part of the No Justice Project. And so the No Justice Project was basically talking about it was basically advocating for individuals who had sex offender on their identification cards, right? And so what we did was, it was me and 8 other plaintiffs who was anonymous. And so with that case, we was able to help over 800 people get removed from off the sex offender registry because of that injustice. Yes. And so now we are continuing to help folks to get the crime against nature law off their record because it's still on their record as a felony or whatever in the state of Louisiana. And so we've been working with leaders of the state, like the district attorney's office, faith-based organizations, the public defender's office, and different agencies that will be able to help and support to try to help get the law removed from all people records. Thank you.
All right. Robin. You pull Robin up.
Okay, so effective leadership, allyship. We, being a formerly incarcerated organization, our whole staff is formerly incarcerated or affected by the criminal justice system by either a close family member. So by that, we've learned that when we're trying to do the work here in Atlanta, we are needing to actually reach out to different organizations to be able to provide the things that we need to move forward. Such as when we need to have attorneys, we actually partner with the Southern Center for Human Rights, where they help us to get things together when we have like issues with inside of the prison systems here. We have a lot of women who contact us inside of prisons that have issues that are going on that are not being addressed, such as medical issues or anything that is not of their rights. And so what we do is we reach out to Southern Center, who helps us in that process and actually moves things forward. We also partner up with a lot of organizations that provide housing because we know with being informally incarcerated and having those barriers, housing is very limited or really non-existent for us. So we partner up with a lot of housing organizations that move legislation to try to change the rights of people who are formerly incarcerated to make it equal, for us as well. Same thing with employment. We partner up with a lot of staffing agencies as well to basically let them know that the skills that formerly incarcerated people have is not something to be ignored. I've heard from many different employers that people that are formerly incarcerated have been some of their best workers. And so a lot of people just have that stigma of not wanting to hire people with a background. So that was one reason why we worked on the campaign and was successful in the Ban the Box campaign, to give people a chance to actually get in the door, to actually talk about their background instead of it being right there on the application. You have to check the box, and we all know that application gets put to the side. So the Ban the Box campaign was something that we were able to do to get people to actually get in, have an interview, put a face with the skills and not actually just look at the person who has made a mistake and have that be used against them for the rest of their lives. And then we also partner up with a lot of churches. I know when I was inside, we had churches. Peachtree Road Ministries was one of the churches that actually came in and spoke with us about things that they do, their prison ministries. A lot of them that came in, at first, we didn't really take to them because I would say it was a lot of ladies who did not look like us, being women of color, and we like, how could you possibly understand? But I think after we sat and talked with them, and we realized that they were trying to understand, and us as formerly incarcerated people had to realize, okay, the only way we can evoke change is to get more people to understand what we're going through and what we're experiencing, and it has to be more than just us. So we started talking to it and opening up to different people from different backgrounds to let them know what is actually going on behind these walls that is occurring that needs to change. And so I call them my ladies because they're the ones that helped me when I came home. And I go and I speak a lot to their congregation and a lot of different things that they have on to bring awareness to formerly incarcerated people and the need for people to understand about formerly incarceration and formerly incarcerated people. And actually one of them was got their husband to give me my first job when I came home from a company that they owned. And another thing is with our anchor team with a campaign that we're running. The campaign we're running is to close and repurposing Atlanta City Detention Center. Atlanta, the ACDC is what we call it. And we realized there that it was very important to have different organizations to be able to help us push this legislation forward. So it comprises of 7 different anchor team organizations that go from such as, like I said before, attorneys, housing, different organizations that do different things across Atlanta. And then we have 50 other organizations that is comprised of our alliance group. And so when we go down to City Hall and we talk to, council members about why this jail needs to be closed and repurposed, we have all these organizations that are backing us. We have all of the ones that may not have experienced incarceration, but they actually understand the need for change within the community, and that the building that was built there was meant to hurt Black and brown folks and poor Black and brown folks, exactly. And to tell you, like Caroline said, right now it's holding over less than 50 people a night, but it costs Atlanta taxpayers $14 million a year. So we try to get people to understand that if that building could be closed and repurposed into something that helps the community, providing resources, that's what's missing in the first place. So why people end up in Atlanta City Detention Center, then we will definitely have a better Atlanta. But unfortunately, we are dealing with what we call right now a mass incarceration council members, mass incarceration mayor of Atlanta, and especially with what we got going on with Cop City and Atlanta City Detention Center. So we're really trying to get more people involved on the legislation side of letting them know this is why these things need to change. Things are getting worse here. And this is because we have lack of resources that are being provided to the community. So the whole thing is like getting more people to understand that. And so we learned that we needed to start getting outside of people who already knew what was going on and start talking to people who actually was just interested, but did not really understand the everyday lives that people have endured inside jails and inside of prisons. So it is definitely important for us to realize that we've got to start talking to people that don't understand, and people outside of our comfort zone, and even some people that don't agree with us. We've changed many minds before of people who say, you can do something bad, you need to go to prison, that's the end of it. But when we sit there and we talk to them about how we're treated when we're inside of prison, what goes on inside of prison, how people come out worse than what they go in. And prison is not what people have designed it to be. I know a lot of people say, oh, you go to prison, you can change your mind and they can help you. And so we had them understand that prison is not what we all grew up believing that prison was to be. Is you go there when you do something bad, they fix you, you come home. I tell people all the time, it's not a Department of Corrections, it's just a holding facility. And you're putting a lot of people together and you're treating them a certain way. And then it's like, okay, introduce them back into society, but there's no gap of first fixing anything that could have been wrong mentally, because we all know as well, prison systems have become the new mental hospitals. So that's another thing that we try to let people know, is that when you people go to prison, it's not all bad people that just go to prison. It could be someone who had a mental health issue that ends up in the prison system because they're not being addressed in a certain amount of ways. So I just think that we have to let people know exactly what's going on. And once people understand the truth and reality of prisons and jails, then you'll have a whole lot more people changing their minds about the need for prisons and jails in this country.
Thank you. I wonder if we want to take a few minutes for questions here and then show the documentary. What do y'all think? Or should we
Yeah,
go?
we've got just over 30 minutes.
Well, given this, the idea in part is you're hearing these power-filled, impactful, not just women, but organizations created by and for. And we're talking about allyship. We're talking about what do we as individuals, what do we as congregations do? Do you have thoughts or questions that you'd like to ask in that context of Wendy and Robin?
Hold all questions for the end.
All right. Well, let me ask you both.
Door.
Oh, so, if individuals say that they want to join you, what's the question they should ask themselves to determine where to step in and how to step in and be a good ally?
For me, I feel like a person should educate themselves on like what they want to do, especially with me, you know, a person who has been impacted by the system, right? And so just seeing all you all here, you know, I feel like, you know, that's something that you all are interested in, right? Just do research, you know, like go on, you know, the websites of individuals, you know, if you unsure about, you know, some things like what restorative justice or anything that in regards to, you know, like trying to be this abolitionist in regards of doing this work, just do your research and just begin to ask questions and begin to like participate in things that will be able to like, you know, help you to be able to enhance your ability to be able to, you know, get into movements that is dealing with these type of oppressive systems.
One question over there.
Yeah, so my question is for Elizabeth. You know, so we saw that we made the decision to establish the center to do this work.
If people online need to hear, Elijah's asking me a question about the church that I pastor starting this nonprofit.
Yeah, so St. Charles Avenue made this decision to enter this work by starting this organization that does this. What are ways that you think other congregations and individuals, what are ways and things that they can do to enter this work as well? Do you think should we have an organization like this, you know, in every city with every church, or do we partner? Can you offer us some?
Are you offering that we begin to establish branches of the St. Charles Center for Faith and Action all over the country? We can do that. That's okay. I did write down a few things that I heard Wendy and Robin saying that I think get at your question of what are the practical things. I don't know about you, but my church used to be Southern Baptist. And so we still have this legacy of a winter offering and a spring offering. And that has really held strong for us. So I heard Wendy talking about money that's needed. Money for people who are on the inside because those calls are expensive to make and being able to get stuff that you need. Some people having to buy toilet paper on the inside. Sometimes we can raise money, can't we? While we're learning and educating and doing all these other things and moving toward abolition. But that's a small, easy thing that we could do for the next Christmas offering or however it is that your church works. I heard both Wendy and Robin talk about legislative action. I think most Alliance congregations are familiar and comfortable with talking about, here's what's going on at the state legislature right now. I heard mention of city council and mayors. If you don't already have those relationships established, those are some relationships that you can establish in your town.
And I want to jump in there on that.
Okay.
Having done policy work, for those of you who don't live in cities, Louisiana legislature doesn't care what New Orleans has to say. Georgia does it, the legislature doesn't want to hear from Atlanta, right? And so if you're in an outstate area, there is a power you wield just by sending an email, just by.
And then the last two, I think one feels really big. Robin mentioned the very nice white ladies who were coming to visit you in prison. You were very sweet to not call them the very nice white ladies from the suburbs who came to visit you in prison.
You read it.
That's big. There are lots of Kairos and other organizations that set up all kinds of for ill and for good efforts to get into prisons and meet with people and minister to them. That feels big. And my congregation's aging. I don't know about yours. So my people will say, well, I'm too old to do that. It's too hard for me to get around. I can't do that. Well, the first thing that Robin talked about was we can learn some new language. We can change the way we're talking about a felon, an inmate, a victim, an oppressor, and we can begin to learn, hey, just like the Marvel universe, everything's a lot more nuanced than that, huh? So if our villains in Marvel movies can be tremendously complex and nuanced, then maybe the mom who left her kids at home because she had to go to work and didn't have anybody to keep them and ended up getting the cops called on her and went to prison for 3 years, maybe that's a really nuanced story as well. So language, legislative action, money. If you want to get involved in I haven't been to Angola. That's one of my own personal goals, is to visit the farm that is Angola. But right now I feel like a voyeur is why I have not done that yet. So I think like also discerning and listening to where we are in the process. Does that give you some concrete stuff?
And the education component is to do what we're doing here. I don't come in and tell my clients stories because they weren't my life. By bringing Wendy and bringing Robin, we're going to show you this documentary. Engage, build relationship through engagement. I feel like that's a good segue to Cans Can't Stand. You want to set it up a little bit at all? Documentary about Wendy Cooper, your documentary?
So Cans Can't Stand is a documentary that is based on my story and other women of my experience who was impacted by a law in Louisiana that discriminates against us, right? And so crime against nature, like I said earlier, was a law that was written in the 1800s, and this law was used to punish folks for engaging in sexual activities that is not procreative. Up until 1982, Louisiana felt the need to adopt this law, resurrect the crime against nature law. And this was a time where HIV and AIDS epidemic was like very high in the early 80s and stuff like that. And so, and that was a way they resurrected this law to kind of like target, LGBTQ individuals. And so what Louisiana legislators have done was, instead of punishing folks for engaging in with sodomy, they added that one word, which was solicitation, to the crime against nature law. So if someone was to engage in sex work and they was to engage in oral or anal sex by solicitation, then they will get up to 5 years in prison, and also they would have to they was required to register as a sex offender. However, they also have a statute in Louisiana, which is the prostitution statute, which is a statute that has the same engagement as crime against nature, but they only have this one word that makes it a difference. And you could get a misdemeanor if you was to engage in vaginal sex and anal and oral by solicitation, and you will be charged with prostitution, right? And so you'll get up to like 6 months in prison, or you just have to pay a fine. And so with this this law and this documentary, it kind of like explains to you like the issues of what women of my experience had to experience, but also too, Black women as well had to endure this injustice as well, right? So hopefully when you see this documentary, you kind of like educate yourself on it, and also to bring awareness to like wherever you at, and allow people to see it and have conversations, because this is serious, this is a law that should not be on the books. No one should be punished because of who they are or what they choose to do, right? And so people are being punished, particularly in my community, for engaging in something that probably 99% of the world probably engages in, right? And nobody shouldn't be punished for something that is an enjoyable practice. So hopefully when you see this documentary, you like it. It's very touching, so you might have a lot of questions.
Thank you, and it's about 15 minutes long. Sound crew, thank you so much. If you will tee up the documentary, we appreciate it.
Prostitution. The girls call it a living. The pimps call it a business. The law calls it a crime. But in New Orleans, young males also preen and prance in the French Quarter, waiting for older men to make cautious advances and arrange dates. And of course, there are the transvestite prostitutes. They all share one sad task. They must score, by hook or crook.
I ain't gonna put too much on because it gets hot out here. I believe that I became a leader because of my experience. My activism didn't just start from being affiliated with the nonprofit spectrum. I feel like I've been doing these things. You be on the phone talking to me, and I be right now.
And one thing I can take and say, those white folks put that screw in my back, honey. They meant that, honey, it was just crime against nature. But I refuse to let them bring me down. What you want? Y'all like the new plan? Y'all like the new this point, girl, is the inclusion of people of color, honey. We can't forget our people of color. We love y'all. The law was crime against nature. That law that basically destroyed my life and many, many others. And what we're going to do, we're going to march and we're going to fight to the bitter end.
A lot of women in my community didn't have the support that they needed from family, right? I utilized my own home to be able to give women in my community a place to lay their head, a place to, take a bath, a place to be able to eat. My mother was a woman who grew up in a time where a lot of things were segregated. My older siblings used to talk about my mother's issues as the things that she had to go through as a black woman, right? She had to drop out of high school. She experienced incarceration. With me coming out to my mother and thinking about my own issues, right, as being a woman of trans experience, a black woman of trans experience, my mother saw herself, right, seeing that, my child is going to go through these same issues as black women. After that conversation, then that's when I began to experience the things that my sister was telling me, discrimination and being stopped by a police officer and in charge. Yeah, so I remember walking up this street. I was on my way to Club Vibe. And so when you look down there, they have a street that's named Governor Nichols. That's the street that I turned on, going towards the Vibe to get on Esplanade. I saw an officer. He stopped me. And so me and the officer began to engage in conversation. He was very attractive. This particular night, I was looking real nice, and I wanted to go meet my friends. We talked for a little bit, and like about 10 minutes into the conversation, he began to talk about language that's in the crime against nature law. he began to talk about like oral sex and anal sex and all these different things. He went into his wallet, tried to give me his number, but all the while, he was going for his badge, and he told me that I was under arrest. I was just in disbelief, like, what am I being arrested for? And so that's when I found out about the crime against nature law.
CAN stands for Crime Against Nature by Solicitation, which covers oral and anal sex for money. All they need to do is offer the sex for money, and that is a crime. The prostitution law in Louisiana also covers oral and anal sex for money, but in 1982, they attached much more severe penalties to CANs.
It was put on the books to criminalize same gender-loving individuals.
A person charged with prostitution, if it was vaginal sex, then it was treated one way. And that person basically walked out of the same door that lawyers and judges came in. And if it was crime against nature, a different sort of sex, that person had to register and oftentimes found themselves going to jail.
Our game plan calls for long sentences and an aggressive approach to prosecution.
I think that maybe we can intimidate with this statute. Time flies when you have fun.
Over the years, it started to affect many of individuals within our community, specifically trans women, Black trans women who engage in survival sex work. It also affects Black women or anybody really engaged in survival sex work, but these are the demographics that they were really targeting.
You can't just carve out certain sex acts and go, wait, if you're doing missionary, that's normal. If you do another thing, it's a felony. But that was kind of the end goal when they changed the law.
If you was a woman of trans experience, you could get stopped. You could be charged with it. People knew these things, right? People knew what this law was just for. If you was in the area where LGBTQ people at, if they feel like you was that person, you was gonna get it.
How is the life of a prostitute in New Orleans? Is it pretty tough?
Very much so.
Why?
The police, the danger. When they catch you, they catch you.
There was homophobia involved in that, transphobia involved in that. There is no other way to explain the creation and application of those laws. It's hard to investigate a rape case. It takes days to successfully write a good armed robbery police report. That's heavy lifting. You know what's easy lifting? Is picking up somebody because they look different walking down the sidewalk. You can do that in 35 minutes and then be off to lunch.
I just want to thank all of you for coming out. This has been a labor of love for all of us, but also pain.
I started my transition at 13 years old. I found who Milan was at 13. I embraced her at 15. I had to literally kick down doors and fight my way through school just to exist as a trans youth. Unfortunately, trans women engage in survival sex work because they are not afforded opportunities. Many of us don't afford the opportunity to graduate because we're pushed out of schools, we're pushed out of our homes.
Nobody don't want to hire us. No one want to give us housing. No one want to give us any of these things, right? We have to live in hotels. You know, a lot of us live in hotels.
Yes, I got many interviews, but I got turned away when Milan walked through the door. Because people couldn't see past this. And I had to do what I had to do.
I feel like without sex work, a lot of us won't be able to live.
So my first time being convicted and charged with a crime against nature, I was 16 years old. It was just a typical night in the quarters for me. You know, I was out, I was having fun, having a good time. I was approached by an undercover officer. One thing led to another. I was sworn by other officers and I was taken to juvenile. I was the first youth to ever come through that system or through that court with a crime against nature. That's something that was equated to be a felony. And being that I was 16, they didn't know really what to do with me. For a whole year, I was put on probation. The judge, I never forget what he told me the day I left out of his courtroom. He said, Milan, this could have went totally a different way. But I didn't want to see a young person like you throw your life away. I was one of the fortunate ones. Let me just say, I said all that to say I was fortunate because I know other women who had to register as sex offenders.
1992, the legislation made punishment for cans even harsher. No, y'all can't see that. In 2011, nearly 40% of the people in New Orleans missed it. 75% were women and 79% were Black.
When you're labeled as a sex offender, it's like this modern day scarlet letter, right? And so you are unable to do things, right? You're unable to access employment, access healthcare, access housing and all these different things. My life was surrounded around shame. I had to present IDs with the words sex offender on, and I didn't want people to see me in that way, right? I was unable to get jobs, right? And then someone who I knew hired me to work into the nursing facility, right? Some workers found out that, I was required to register as a sex offender. They began to print out papers of my profile that was on the sex offender database and began to, pass these flyers out. I had suicidal thoughts. I wanted to just end my life. I remember me being stopped by an officer when he realized, who I was. I remember him hitting me with the billy. The side of my face was kind of fractured. Multiple of my tooths began to fall out. After being misgendered and thrown water on and laughed at and talked about, after I was released, one of the officers who misgendered me and did all these things, he raped me, right? And he had the power to do that, and this is why. No one was gonna believe me. For number one, I was a woman of trans experience. Number two, I was a sex offender, and he was an officer.
In the mid-2000s, the scale of arrests and police increased with cans.
I was on the phone with one of my girlfriends, telling her this law is it's hindering me, right? And then she began trying to connect me with different people. So one of the people she asked me that I know Deion Haywood.
At a press conference this morning, a group of lawyers and advocates announced a lawsuit against Bobby Jindal and others on behalf of 9 anonymous plaintiffs. Now the goal is to have them taken off of the sex offender registry for crime against nature convictions.
I think this is a groundbreaking moment. I think if we're talking about a new New Orleans and a new city and reforming the criminal justice system and making New Orleans a better place for its residents, this is a step in the right direction.
That's when I was a part of the No Justice Project. It was anonymous. We went from there in 2012, we won.
A settlement with the state of Louisiana removed 700 such individuals from the sex offender registry.
No one had to register as a sex offender anymore. The sex offender logo on their IDs, it had to be removed within 30 days. They was able to access some type of housing. They was able to access some type of employment. Although it was a victory, it wasn't a complete victory, right?
Although they were removed from the sex offender registry, people with cans convictions still have felonies.
2018, I found the cans can't stand. My goal is to get the law eradicated.
law in the books is going to always give an officer that discretion, so the law needs to be taken off the books.
When this law be removed, right, they're always going to find ways to try to, attack this community.
Cans is still on the books, so is prostitution. And, whatever you think of the exchange of sex for money, do we want to be throwing people in prison? Cans and prostitution are two of many laws that are still used to make life worse for people whose lives are already really hard.
It kind of got swept under the rug and stuff like that, but Wendy, kind of kicked that rug and was like, no, we're not sweeping this under the rug. This is the problem in the community, that we are constantly sweeping things under the rug. We too busy tying to the respectability politics. We worrying about how other people feel and this, that, and the third, when trans women are uncomfortable pretty much 90% of the day. It's okay if you're uncomfortable 5 or 10 fucking minutes. It's okay.
The trans community in New Orleans is changing. A lot of women are more open, and they're talking out, they're fighting, Then when I was coming up, it was more of like, you don't have a voice, so you can't speak.
I talk, it's because I'm carrying all of that, and I survived, so I can be here, and I can say this with you.
And I tell people all the time, like the younger generation, they more of like that adrenaline for us, right? And they're more like that adrenaline to help us not accept whatever's being thrown at you.
The oath that I took was that I'm gonna fight with every breath I have in me. And even if it takes for me, and I really mean this when I say, if it meant for me to have to transition out of this reality, just to make sure that my community, my generation behind me, has it just a little bit easier and better, then I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And I know that liberation, it comes without compensation.
We're trans, we're fabulous, don't fuck with us. We're trans, we're fabulous, don't fuck with us. We're trans, we're fabulous, don't fuck with us.
In 2011, the legislature made cans a misdemeanor, but the legislation was not retroactive. In 2021, a group of current and former sex workers, including Wendy Cooper, testified at the state capitol in support of a bill that would end the discrimination. It failed in committee. Wendy Cooper continues to lead the Cans Can't Stand in partnership with Operation Restoration. For more information on Fight the Repeal, talk to Wendy. She's here. Take a breath in. Release. Fertilize that love. I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to do what we do at Hillside. I love you. I bless you, and I thank God for you. The pause is an honoring, and the pause is to hold on to the moment and allow it to be there.
I was glad to hear Ben this morning say that people want to fire him. Is he gone now? No, I'm just talking about Ben. He snuck out. I think if pastors are doing their jobs these days, somebody should want to fire you. And this is holy work. We hear it said all the time, if you aren't pissed off, you weren't paying attention. And so I hope that you are ending this day really agitated and really uncomfortable. And it's my hope that maybe it even creeps into your sleep tonight. We give homework as part of our reimagining retreats. And at the end of each day, you've got a notebook that you can take back and look through the questions. I thought I would offer you some of our homework questions for today to take with you into the restlessness of the rest of today and tonight. And then we'll have some questions downstairs for you tomorrow morning for anybody who wants to consider those questions and talk with each other over coffee. Consider all you've seen and heard today. It's been a long, full day. What sticks with you the most? What's that thing that's just kind of in you? Pay attention to that and ask yourself why. Maybe spirit is moving. Is that where you're feeling led to learn more? Is that where you're feeling led to act? And if it is, what are the tools that you need to get to the next step? We're 100% on board for abolition, but we know that it takes some steps, incremental, sometimes painfully slow. Robin D.G. Kelley, in his book, Freedom Dreams, Black Radical Imagination, writes, trying to envision somewhere in advance of nowhere, as poet Jane Cortez puts it, is an extremely difficult task. Yet it is a matter of great urgency. Without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. We not only end up confused, rudderless, and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us. May you receive those words like a blessing on you as we get ready to leave this place. We're maxed out on time, but we could try answering a couple of questions if you want.
How about if we do the questions up, if y'all want to come up afterwards, we'll do that. You're going to come up, come on up. Do you want to build out, this is a building, so you'll see there's a session 2 tomorrow. We will build upon this and talk about restorative practices, which is circles and so much more. It will talk about discernment. It will talk about how to move next. I want to thank you. We have a second, where did Melu go? Where's the team that planned this program? Others in the room that were part of the planning committee?
The staff, the Alliance staff, so.
Thank you. Yeah, all right.
Thank y'all so much for your leadership on this. Thank you for sharing your stories. Wendy, thank you for sharing your story with us. We hold it, it's sacred to us as well. As we go from this place, want to make just an update from our community. As some of you all may know, earlier this afternoon, Mahan Styler fell in the courtyard. So we just wanted to take a moment to offer a word of prayer for him. He was taken to the ER so that the doctors can look at his leg to kind of figure out what happened. He's in great spirits, as he often is, but it's asked that, we hold him in prayer. So just want to offer a prayer for Mahan and for our time that we've had today before hearing the announcements. Join me for a word of prayer. Gracious God, we give thanks for your love, for your grace, for your mercy, for your justice, and for your healing. We give thanks especially for people who remind us of your love, your grace, your mercy, and your healing. So God, as Mahan is at the ER right now, we ask that you send your angels to surround Mahan. Be with them, protect them, bring him back quickly to us. oh God. And as we pray for Mahan, I know that Mahan would want us to also continue to pray for the people who are doing this work, to remember why we're here. And so we lift up Wendy. We lift up the trans community, especially the Black and brown trans community. And we invite your Spirit, oh God, to help us see them, to know them, to be with them as they struggle against systems that make their lives uncomfortable 90% of the time. God, for these and for the other prayers and meditations of our hearts, we pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.